The early hours of the 15th of March, 1939. German troops begin crossing the borders of the Czech lands, advancing into Bohemia and Moravia without meeting organized resistance. Columns of Wehrmacht, the German army, move along main roads toward key cities, while armored vehicles and motorized formations enter Prague before dawn. The occupation follows directly from the political collapse of the Czechoslovak state, as President Emil Hácha, under pressure in Berlin the night before, has accepted German demands and effectively surrendered control of the country. As German forces enter the capital, snow and cold weather accompany their arrival. Civilians watch in silence as soldiers march through the streets and take control of government buildings, communication centers, and strategic points across the city. By morning, Prague is fully in German hands, and similar scenes unfold across the rest of the territory, where local authorities are replaced or subordinated to German command. On this day, Adolf Hitler arrives at Prague Castle and proclaims the establishment of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. This formalizes the reality on the ground, the complete loss of sovereignty and the beginning of an occupation that will soon be marked by repression, resistance, and in 1942, acts of terror such as the destruction of the village of Ležáky, which will claim 44 lives of Czech men, women, and children. However, this crime will not go unpunished, and in time justice will take its inevitable course. The annihilation of Ležáky must be understood within a broader framework of German occupation and the escalation of repression in 1942. The Second World War, which had begun on the 1st of September 1939 with a German invasion of Poland, expanded rapidly across Europe, bringing vast territories under Nazi control. In March 1939, the Czech and Moravian lands were occupied and reorganized into the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. From the beginning, the Nazi occupation regime relied on a combination of administrative control and systematic repression. The Gestapo, German secret police, and other Nazi security services monitored the population, suppressed political opposition, and targeted individuals and groups considered hostile to German rule. Jewish inhabitants were subjected to persecution, deportation, and eventual extermination. At the same time, the economy of the Protectorate was integrated into the German war effort, with industry redirected toward military production and labor strictly controlled by the Germans. Despite these harsh conditions, resistance activity developed across the territory. One part of the resistance were agents, soldiers from the Czechoslovak army in exile, which was fighting for the independence of Czechoslovakia. These agents were trained in Great Britain and sent back into occupied Europe. From 1941 onwards, groups of agents were deployed into the Protectorate with specific tasks: to establish contact with resistance at home, maintain communication with the government in exile in London, and coordinate sabotage and terrorist operations. Among these groups was Silver A, which operated primarily in eastern Bohemia. The effectiveness of such groups depended heavily on communication. The radio transmitter, Lidice, operated by Silver A, became a crucial link between the Protectorate and London. Its presence allowed the resistance to transmit information about German movements, industrial production, and political conditions, as well as to receive instructions from abroad. Maintaining this connection required secrecy, mobility, and the cooperation of local civilians willing to risk their lives. In the region around the city of Pardubice, about 100 kilometers or 62 miles east of Prague, such support was found among members of the resistance network, including individuals connected to the settlement of Ležáky, home to around 50 people. The situation changed dramatically on the 27th of May 1942, when Czechoslovak agents carried out the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, the acting Reich protector and one of the central figures of the Nazi security system. Heydrich had been instrumental in consolidating German control over the Protectorate and in implementing policies of repression and terror. His death was a significant blow to the German administration, but it also triggered an immediate and brutal response. Thousands of people were arrested, interrogated, and hundreds were executed. Entire resistance networks were dismantled through a combination of surveillance informants and torture. On the 10th of June 1942, the village of Lidice was destroyed in a highly publicized act of reprisal. Although its inhabitants had no connection to the assassination, the village was chosen as an example. The men were executed, the women deported to concentration camps, and the children subjected to racial selection, with many later murdered in gas vans in the Chełmno extermination camp in German-occupied Poland. The destruction of Lidice was intended to send a clear message, but it did not end the search for those connected to the resistance. A decisive turning point came on the 16th of June, when one of the Czechoslovak agents, Karel Čurda, voluntarily reported himself to the Gestapo in Prague. In exchange for promises of clemency and financial reward, he provided detailed information about resistance networks and contacts. Among the areas affected by his testimony was the Pardubice region, where the Silver A Group operated. This betrayal allowed the German authorities to identify and arrest members of the local network. On the 20th of June, the first arrests were carried out in the vicinity of Ležáky. The manager of a nearby quarry was taken into custody, and the following day the miller Jindřich Švanda, whose mill stood close to the settlement, was arrested as well. Both men were subjected to interrogation and torture, and under these conditions the existence of the transmitter Libuše and its location became known to the German security services. The connection between the resistance and Ležáky was established, and the decision to destroy the settlement followed quickly. On the 24th of June 1942, in the early afternoon, German forces moved to carry out the operation. 150 men from the Pardubice company of the 20th Reserve Police Regiment, Böhmen, acting under the direction of the Gestapo, surrounded Ležáky. To ensure that the cordon was complete, around 30 Czech gendarmes were deployed to form an outer ring. The inhabitants of Ležáky were gathered together, along with individuals who happened to be in the area at the time. Even children who were attending school in a nearby town were brought back under guard. The operation was methodical. Names were checked, people counted, and no distinction was made between those directly involved in resistance and those who were not. The entire community was treated as collectively responsible. The detainees were transported to Pardubice, to a local villa which had become a central site for executions in the area. On the evening of the 24th of June, after 9 o'clock, all 33 inhabitants of the village of Ležáky, older than 15, who were in the village on that day, were shot. 4 other inhabitants were murdered by the Germans a few days later. At the same time, the physical destruction of Ležáky was carried out with equal precision. The houses were first looted, valuables removed, and then the buildings were set on fire. By late afternoon on the 24th of June 1942, flames spread through the settlement, consuming wooden structures and reducing them to ashes. The mill, the houses, and all signs of daily life disappeared within hours. In the months that followed, even the ruins were removed. By the autumn of 1943, the site had been leveled, and the settlement ceased to exist not only in reality, but also in the physical landscape. The fate of the children from Ležáky followed the logic of Nazi racial policy. After being transported from Pardubice to Prague, and then to a transit camp in Łódź in German-occupied Poland, they were subjected to selection. 2 of the children were deemed suitable for Germanization and placed with German families. The remaining 11 were handed over to the Gestapo and murdered, most likely in gas vans at the Chełmno extermination camp, the same way as kids from the Lidice village. While the victims could never be brought back, justice eventually caught up with those who had planned the destruction of the village and the murder of its inhabitants. Some paid for their crimes with their own lives even during the Second World War, including Gerhard Klages, the Gestapo commander in Pardubice, who organized the destruction of Ležáky. He died on the 15th of October 1944 during the fighting in Budapest in Hungary. A similar fate likely befell Hans Ulrich Geschke, who probably also died during the fighting in Budapest, although he was not officially declared dead until 1959, and there are concerns that he may have managed to change his identity and evade justice. However, this certainly did not happen after the war to those who were brought before Czechoslovak courts. Such was the case of Hubert Hanauschke, a member of the Gestapo and the SS who actively participated in the persecution of members of the Silver A parachute unit and brutally interrogated residents of Ležáky. On the 10th of December 1946, Hanauschke was sentenced to death for his crimes against Czechoslovak citizens and was executed on the same day. Karl Hermann Frank, who orchestrated the terror against the Czech population during the existence of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, was captured by American troops and extradited relatively quickly to Czechoslovakia, where he was to be prosecuted for his crimes. In front of the Czechoslovak court, he was found guilty of war crimes and being responsible for the deaths of thousands of people in the Protectorate. Frank attempted to defend himself by claiming that his work was primarily for the welfare of the German nation, that he was not driven by hatred toward the Czech people, but that he had no knowledge of the true cruelty of the consequences of his decisions. This was a lie, and on the 21st of May, 1946, the verdict was handed down. The reading of the judgment and its reasoning lasted until the following day, and Karl Hermann Frank was sentenced to death by hanging. 3 hours after the reading of the judgment's reasoning was completed, and after all requests for clemency had been rejected as Frank begged for his life, despite crimes he committed during the war, the execution took place on the 22nd of May, 1946, in the courtyard of Pankratz prison in Prague, before the eyes of 5,000 citizens, including numerous journalists and photographers. Kurt Daluger, the acting Reich protector who succeeded Reinhard Heydrich and participated in the terror that unfolded in the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia after Heydrich's death, also stood in front of the Czechoslovak court. Throughout his trial, Daluger was unrepentant, claiming he was only following Hitler's orders and had a clear conscience. He was convicted of all charges and sentenced to death on the 23rd of October, 1946. Daluger was hanged in Pankratz prison on the 24th of October, 1946. Both of the former high-ranking Nazis were buried in an unmarked grave at the Diablice cemetery in Prague. In the years that followed, Ležáky was not rebuilt. Instead, the site was transformed into a place of memory. Monuments were erected to commemorate the victims, and the entire area was recognized as a national cultural monument.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.